So as promised in my last manic explosion, I'm going to talk about mecha anime, but I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to this one because whereas sports anime, I feel strongly that people need to give it a chance because it's something that will always be around. There will always be great sports anime. I do think mecha as a genre is basically dying, and I don't think it has much chance of recovery, and I'll get into why later into this video. But I do want to help people to sort of understand the mecha genre because people will say, oh, I don't watch mech because I don't care about giant robots. And in spite of that, there have been certain mech shows that have been massively popular, such as Code Geass, Gurren Lagann, Evangelion, or Darling in the Franxx. These are all, in America, in Western fandom in general, these were all very big shows, even among people who don't generally like giant robots. And those are all shows that have giant robots in them. And people will say, well, I liked that show even though it had giant robots, but that was not the appeal. Well, I have to tell you, the number of shows in which giant robots are the appeal is extremely small. It is very, very rare that there's a mecha show where you would have to like giant robots in order to enjoy the show. Giant robots are a tool. They're a weapon. They're like a sword. Even in a show about sword fighting, it's almost never the only thing the show is about, is watching people fight with swords. Just like with sports anime, it's not about watching people play a sport. It's about the characters, their drama, their development, getting to know them, the story, the intrigue of the story. And when I talked about sports anime, I didn't dive that much into what is the appeal of sports anime because the appeal is different in every show. And the same goes for mecha. But there is something unique about mecha as a genre, which is that most of the time, aside from the fact that there are mecha, it is very difficult to discern the genre of these shows because they essentially use the attractiveness of mecha as a hook to get you into a story that can be whatever it wants. There are certain mech shows that are much easier to describe the genre of, but there are many shows that use mecha as just a springboard to explore a bunch of different ideas and styles. And, it's funny because most of those shows are popular, even in America. I was looking through the list of all the mech shows, and most of the good ones have been well respected by a lot of people. Eureka 7, which is one of my favorite anime of all time, one of the best coming-of-age stories in the medium, an epic adventure full of action and romance and all things good, Full Metal Panic, a comedy/military action, fish-out-of-water story that's a ton of fun. Escaflowne, a high fantasy series that has mechs in it, which is also an isekai. It's about a girl who gets sent to another world, and gets embroiled in the politics of that place. And there's mech fights. There's Razafon, which is very much in the vein of Evangelion as a more psychological and experimental mecha series. You've got Star Driver, which is like a cheeky, weird high school. It's like Revolutionary Girl Utena with mechs and less to say. Gunbuster, which is, the directorial debut of Hideaki Anno. It's just a really awesome sci-fi show with some really great scenes and concepts in it. Promare, which is very similar to Gurren Lagann. Vandred from the early 2000s, which was about a far-flung future in which men and women have completely diverged as two different species, essentially, living on different planets. But they have to, work together against a common enemy using mechs. You got Big O, which is basically Batman with more a very noir Batman, except Batman pilots a giant robot. You've got Blue Gender, which is a sci-fi horror set in a post-apocalyptic future where people wake up from cryostasis and have to use mechs to fight giant fucking weird monsters and stuff. And again, none of these is the appeal of the mech. The mech is just something that allows the story to be facilitated. It is just a cool weapon through which to, convey the narrative. So, obviously, I think most of us can agree, yeah, we love mecha anime, because mecha anime is just a vague catch-all for shows that have robots, which can be basically anything. So let's talk about a little bit about mecha history. Like, was there ever a time when the point of mecha was giant robots? I think the argument could be made that maybe back when giant robots were brand new in like the 60s and 70s, that a lot of the appeal was getting to see robot fights. You know, a lot of shows were just episodic monster of the week shows in which you get to see the mech use a super attack to destroy an enemy. But even still, I mean, people remembered those shows for their characters and their stories and the stuff that, you know, actually happens in the narrative. The fact that, you know, a lot of these had more of a militaristic tinge where people could actually die in these shows, and they might have real drama in them as compared to most shows made for children at the time. And then, of course, you have Gundam, which comes along, and the whole purpose of it is to be a serious military drama set in space with robots as the weapons. The robots are, I mean, I wouldn't say they're incidental to the, you know, the appeal of Gundam, but they are certainly not central to it. And there have been tons and tons of great Gundam shows. You know, even if you think that the franchise is like a bit unwieldy to get into, there's tons of OVAs that are only like 6 episodes with completely self-contained dramatic storylines that tell these really gripping drama and war narratives. You know, that just happen to have robots. I'll leave a link in the description to the How to Find Your Starter Gundam thing that my buddy Ghost Lightning did a long time ago. Granted, it has not been updated for the last decade or so, but I mean, you don't need to watch a brand new one, do you? So, you know, you had Gundam going on, starting from 1979, and then in the early 80s, we had Macross as another very influential, foundational, still-going mecha franchise. And Macross, the whole conceit of that show was to be a love story on the backdrop of great battles. So the entire show is mostly this, you know, this epic sci-fi war story that's mostly focused on the love triangle of the main characters, and it's more broad themes about culture and what it means to have culture. And again, the mechs, I mean, yeah, there's cool mech fights. And I mean, I guess if you really are just very bored watching mech fights, I could understand. I mean, just like I said about sports anime, personally, I find that if the narrative is good, if the scenes are well directed, they will be exciting. You know, watching two mechs have a fight is no less interesting than watching two humans have a fight if the show makes the emotional stakes heightened. Yeah, so those are both great franchises. You can watch the original shows in either one, and they're excellent. They hold up to this day. They're very good shows with great writing. You know, much better writing than most of what comes out today, I would say. And now I'm going to tell you about some obscure robot shows. Not super obscure, but stuff that doesn't get talked about as much, you know. You have stuff like Martian Successor Nadesco, which is sort of deconstructive of a lot of the tropes of the mecha genre, while also being just like a fun comedy slash drama with, again, you know, just great moments and characters and great dramatic storyline. You've got Pat Labor, which is about mechs being used by just a regular Japanese police force, you know, that just uses mechs for very basic daily things. It's sort of mundane in its presentation of mecha. You've got stuff like Uchusen Kantiramisu, which is just a pure parody of the genre that I personally thought was hilarious. Not a lot of people seem to care. Giant Robo, one of the best anime OVAs of all time, which feels like this epic stage play with just ridiculously over-the-top dramatic stakes and staging, and just gorgeous direction and animation, just an incredible feeling show to watch. You got stuff like Brigadoon, which is about a cute little girl who's kind of spazzy falling in love with a robot. That show is weird. I didn't finish it yet, but it was very strange. Or what about Armored Trooper Votoms, which is basically about this badass military dude just like traveling around a war-torn galaxy and getting into all kinds of like crazy action scenarios and plots and stuff like that. Sort of like a secret agent vibe. 5-star stories. This only ever had an OVA that does not tell much of the story and can be kind of confusing. It's based on a longer running manga, which is very well regarded, but it is one of the most aesthetically beautiful anime I have ever seen. Just the fashion, the style of the character designs and the mechs is really incredible. So that's just a bunch of mecha anime that I think are great, that I can personally confirm the quality of. that, none of them is the core appeal robots. I really think, like, aside from some of the super old shows, and then stuff like Gao Gaigar and the Brave series that was from the 90s, was, that one was more like the appeal of it is if you like robots, but also the robots could talk and had personalities in most of those shows, so it goes a little bit beyond merely being about the robots. Maybe Super Robot Wars OG the Inspector or something, like, but I mean, you won't even find out about these shows unless you're a Mecha fan already. So yes, like, there is stuff that is aimed directly at Mecha fans that is purely for them, but it's very rare. It's pretty much dead now. I mean, all the mech that really comes out is going to be stuff that's trying to hit outside that audience, and I'm going to kind of explain why, because the thing about it is, when you think about how technology used to advance, it was all about things getting bigger. Mechs were, construed in the first half of the previous decade, when the idea of just a gigantic mechanical monstrosity that's more powerful than any other because of its sheer size. It's a giant representation of a human. It's the future. It's what you're hoping for. But, in modern day, when technology is all about getting smaller and stealthier and infiltrating your life in subtle ways, and, we can't really picture the future actually having giant robots, I think it makes the genre feel cheesier. It doesn't grab the imaginations of children in the same way that they used to, who really might have thought that these were something that was going to be possible in some far-off future, I don't think that the appeal of Mecha has gone away necessarily. I think that we can feel it on a deeper level than what is merely cultural and in the moment. Like, the idea of giant man or giant machine has always been a trope, but I just think that nowadays, in our more fear-driven culture, where we're more worried about the insidiousness of something subtle that makes it past our attention and infects society from the inside, like, that's the more popular trope now than big robot beats things up. But again, that was only ever meant to get you in the door. It was never the core of the story. It was never the main purpose of any of these shows. They're all good shows, completely. If they didn't have mechs, they'd be just as good, basically. So you should definitely check these shows out. The genre is not thriving. It is not likely going to continue to have tons of amazing stuff outside the Gundam franchise, but if anything, that's the perfect excuse for you to get in now. You could pretty much binge all the good mecha anime and be done. Once you've caught up on Gundam, and you don't have to watch all of them, believe me, you'll figure out which ones you want to watch by just communicating with anybody who knows Gundam. Someone who knows it better than I do, please, because I'll get yelled at for my suggestions. But, you don't have to watch all of it, but you can get caught up and then enjoy the new Gundam stuff that comes out, because there's, Gundam basically now exists as film series that are generally pretty good and engaging. So, yeah, give all these mech shows a shot, dude!